I recall growing up in Calgary after the war, and there was this sense with our family and within the community and the war veterans that were part of life with my dad, that the country was getting better, that things were becoming more robust. And they were right. The middle class was growing not just in Calgary, but across the country. We were hearing of massive projects like railroads going on across the country, of the St. Lawrence Seaway, of the expanding of fisheries, of all sorts of homes being built. Oil was being discovered, grain everywhere, so much grain that we were exporting it to troubled parts of the world. Yes, we had this feeling that what we had in Canada was actually something of a calling card. It was something that we could show the rest of the world and say, food, we got it. Housing, we got it. Jobs, for sure, right? A prosperous life, yes. The ability to be mobile, absolutely. And there's also education and universal healthcare. Those were the calling cards. And Canada repeatedly rated extremely high on UN indexes and other as one of the greatest countries in the world. Are those things our calling cards today? Not really. In fact, we're having all sorts of trouble figuring out how to get back to that. Now, since the summer, there have been a number of different research firms that have tested in different countries around the world about how people feel about democracy. Now, I think this is partly being driven by what people are seeing in the United States. But when you look at all of these other countries, how are they feeling about their democracy? Does it work? The largest of them all was done by the Pew Research Center. It analyzed 23 different countries. It sent out all of these questionnaires. There was a lot of people involved in it. And what they came back with really kind of shocked the world. Over 50% of every country that they looked at was dissatisfied with their democracy. And if you threw in the economies of those nations, those numbers went even higher. The median of all of them together, of the 23 countries together, was 58%. So in other words, the people of those nations, and they're Western nations and prosperous nations, are not happy with what's going on. In America, it was over 60%, but we understand why that's happened. Who were those 23 countries? Well, Canada was one of them. So was Sweden. So was the Netherlands, France, Germany, South Korea, Spain, Italy, the United Kingdom. These are normally fairly prosperous countries, and they're dissatisfied with what's going on. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, and we all have our opinions about politics and economies and everything else. But this much we do know. If people feel that they cannot afford dinner, they can't afford a house, they can't afford a car, or they have a job that does not have benefits, but they can't afford an apartment because the rent has continued to soar over the years. If the cost of living is continuing to increase in the way that it has, they don't just sit there and blame those things. They look at the system and say it's not working. They look at the economy and say it's not working. Let me give you something of an example. We all love professional sports and watching the teams, men and women, as they play these things, but especially in places like the NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, and other sports as well. We are continuing to hear that in places like the NFL, quarterbacks and others are making tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It's also true in baseball and other major league sports. And we look at that and go, well, they're talented people, that they probably deserve what they get. And boy, do they produce a product. They're exciting players. They do a fantastic job in all that they're doing. And that would be 100% true. There are TV rights, there's markets, there's all these other things. That's fantastic. The problem is that a family that's in the lower middle class or even lower than that can't afford to go to any of the games. So the old adage, I lived this myself, but the old adage that you were a youth and you went to a baseball game or a football game and you were inspired by what you saw and you wanted that to be yourself. Professional sports had that ability of inducing within kids, even who didn't have much money, a desire to be great, to grow, to be talented, whatever it is. But now they can't even afford to go to those games. I could tell you what the average ticket prices are for those places around here in Toronto or Detroit, but it's just discouraging. The average person cannot go to it. It's really difficult. That's kind of what we've done with our economies. We see it. It's exciting, but it's out of reach. We see all the sales about homes or about food or about travel or cars, whatever it is. And they're all getting more and more out of reach. So that's why a 58% median of 23 different countries are saying the gig's up. We're looking for something more solid. That's really important. And yes, those things used to be our calling card. But what is it now? I was in a meeting not too long ago when somebody said, it's my dream that this country will be able to help kids find food. Now, this came as a result of the Middlesex London Health Unit report that said 1 out of every 4 kids in London, Ontario is food insecure. This troubled the audience when I said it. And it was difficult for them. I mean, it's one thing if it's us, it's totally different when it's about our kids. And so she dreamed of that day when things would get better. And I remember listening to that and thinking, you dream it. I mean, that used to be our reality. It's not as though we're struggling through history and trying to get to that point. We had it in Canada. We had calling cards all over the place that we were sending to the rest of the world and said, we've got it together. We've got a cohesion, not only amongst citizens, but also amongst political parties, that they know the job that they have to do and what they have to give. In America, look what's happening. 47 million people now no longer have the SNAP program or food stamps. And they're lining up at food banks who are not able to help in America. Can you blame those people for looking at their government, whoever it is, and thinking the system doesn't work for them? Here's another one. Just 8 tech gurus in the United States have more wealth than 4 billion people of this country. Now, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anybody. All I'm trying to say is we're out of balance, and surely we must be able to see that. Unless we find a way of all of us coming together as citizens and forcing our politicians and policymakers and pundits and getting the media to focus on these things, unless we do that, we continue to go down that route, and we have no calling cards to offer. Nothing to say. Pretty soon it'll be maybe 3/4 of our population will be discouraged with democracy, and they'll start looking for options that aren't quite as fair, that aren't quite as equitable, and perhaps even more out of reach. What they will induce is anger. So I never want it to be said by us as a London Food Bank that someday we dream that our kids will be able to be food secure. This should never be a dream. This should be a reality right now. It should be a rite of passage that every kid has the ability to do better than we do. Not just economically, but in opportunities and other things. We have a long way to go as a nation, and the reason why we do is because we've fallen a long way as a nation. The food bank is determined to speak about food security. We are also determined to talk about kids. And maybe that's the bellwether that we need. Maybe that's the thermometer, the barometric pressure. Maybe we need to look at that and know if it was 1 kid out of every 10, we're making progress. But 1 out of every 4, when it used to be 1 out of every 6 in 2022, we're going the other way. So we as a food bank are determined. The Thanksgiving food drive, in which we mentioned to you that this is what was happening about kids. And guess what you did? You gave more than the year before. The media covered it like crazy because it was about kids. This is what we have to fight for, a better future for all of them. This is where we're going to go and tack as a food bank. We're going to try to continue to remind all of us as a community and people across the country that we have to get that back. We want our Canada back, the one that we grew up in. Now, if you were to ask us, are we a wealthy country? Of course we are. But it's not getting to us. Something is going wrong. So let's get that back. Let's all of us as citizens press for fairness, for equal access, for the ability, if anybody has the talent and the will to survive and thrive in this nation. If we don't have that, that will be a sad day. But if our kids never get out of the starting block, we have actually not much to say to the rest of them.